Hello everyone, I am the storyteller, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching now? Get comfortable and relax buried in the blanket. I've never been one to believe in coincidences. Maybe that's why what happened to me 3 months ago still keeps me awake at night, staring at the ceiling, listening to every creak and whisper in the walls around me. I keep telling myself it was just a series of unfortunate events, but deep down I know better. It started when I moved into the house on Maple Street. A rental, nothing fancy, just a 2-bedroom craftsman with hardwood floors and windows that caught the morning light just right. The landlord, Mrs. Chen, was eager to get it rented. Too eager, I realize now. She knocked $200 off the monthly rent without me even asking. Said she just wanted the right kind of tenant. Someone quiet, she said. Someone who wouldn't cause trouble. The first few weeks were perfect. I'd wake up to sunlight streaming through those beautiful windows, make my coffee, and sit in the living room reading before work. It was the kind of peace I'd been craving after years of apartment living with paper-thin walls and neighbors who seemed to live their lives at maximum volume. The blanket was already there when I moved in. Mrs. Chen mentioned it briefly during the walkthrough, said the previous tenant had left it behind and I was welcome to keep it or throw it away, whatever I preferred. It was a beautiful thing, hand-quilted with intricate patterns in deep blues and greens. Heavy, too. The kind of blanket that seemed to have weight beyond its physical presence. I kept it folded on the couch at first. It looked expensive, antique even, and it seemed wrong to just toss it out. Besides, winter was coming, and a good blanket is never something to waste. The dream started about 3 weeks after I moved in. Nothing dramatic at first. Just a sense of weight pressing down on me while I slept, like someone had piled extra blankets on the bed. I'd wake up feeling suffocated, gasping for air, but when I'd reach for the covers, I'd find just my usual bedding. Light cotton sheets, nothing heavy enough to cause that sensation. I blamed it on stress. New house, new routines, new neighborhood. My body was probably just adjusting. But then I started finding the blanket in different places. The first time, I discovered it draped over my reading chair in the morning. I could have sworn I'd left it folded on the couch the night before, but maybe I'd moved it and forgotten. People do that, move things and forget. It happens. The second time, I found it spread across my bed. This gave me pause because I specifically remembered thinking about using it the night before but deciding against it. The weather had been warm, unseasonably so for October. Why would I have put such a heavy blanket on my bed? I started paying closer attention after that. Each morning I'd check where I'd left the blanket the night before, making mental notes. Without fail, I'd find it somewhere else. Sometimes folded neatly in a different room, sometimes spread out as if someone had been using it. The rational part of my mind offered explanations. Maybe I was sleepwalking. Maybe the stress of the move was affecting me more than I realized. Maybe I was moving the blanket in my sleep and just not remembering. But the rational part of my mind couldn't explain the smell. It was subtle at first, just a hint of something unfamiliar when I'd come home from work. Not unpleasant exactly, but foreign, like someone else's laundry detergent or a cologne I didn't recognize. It was strongest near the blanket, wherever I happened to find it that day. I started doing things to test myself. I'd place the blanket in specific positions, draped over the arm of the couch in a particular way, or folded with one corner slightly askew. In the morning, the blanket would be somewhere else entirely, arranged differently than I could have done unconsciously. That's when I started considering the possibility that someone else was in the house. The thought should have terrified me immediately, but it crept in slowly, like cold water rising around your ankles. First, it was just a whisper of possibility, then a nagging worry, then a certainty that sat in my stomach like a stone. Someone was coming into my house while I slept. Started checking the locks obsessively. Door locks, window locks, even the basement door that I never used. Everything was always secure. No signs of forced entry, no scratches around the keyholes, no footprints in the flower beds beneath the windows, but the blanket kept moving. I called Mrs. Chen on a Thursday morning after finding the blanket spread across my kitchen table like a tablecloth. It was such a bizarre place for it that I couldn't possibly have put it there myself. Conscious or unconscious. Mrs. Chen, I said when she answered, trying to keep my voice steady. I need to ask you about the previous tenant, the one who left the blanket. There was a long pause. Then, what about him? Him. She'd never mentioned the gender before. Did he leave suddenly? Were there any issues with the house? Another pause, longer this time. Why do you ask? I explained about the blanket, trying to make it sound less crazy than it felt in my head. Mrs. Chen listened without interrupting, and when I finished, the silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Mrs. Chen? He didn't leave, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. David, the previous tenant, he died in the house. My blood went cold. What do you mean he died? How? In his sleep. Natural causes, the coroner said, but... She trailed off. But what? He was found wrapped in that blanket, completely covered head to toe. The police said it looked like he'd been... I don't know how to describe it. Cocooned. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Why didn't you tell me this before? The law doesn't require disclosure for natural deaths. And I thought if I told you, you wouldn't want the house. I need good tenants. Quiet tenants. The line went quiet again, and I could hear Mrs. Chen breathing on the other end. There's something else, she said. After David died, before I could rent the house again, I had to come by a few times. To check on things, you know. And that blanket. I'd find it in different rooms, different positions. I thought maybe it was the cleaning crew moving it around, but I fired 3 different cleaning services. They all said the same thing. They'd clean the house, put everything in order, and when they'd come back the next week, that blanket would be somewhere else. They said it gave them the creeps. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the blanket spread across the table. In the afternoon light, the blues and greens seemed deeper, more complex. I could see the individual stitches now, tiny and precise, forming patterns that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. That night I decided to get rid of it. I carried the blanket out to my car, planning to drop it off at Goodwill in the morning. It was heavier than I remembered, and as I loaded it into my trunk, I caught that smell again. Stronger now, unmistakably the scent of another person. Not David, surely. He'd been dead for months. But someone. I went to bed feeling lighter, more optimistic than I had in weeks. Problem solved. No more blanket, no more mysterious movements, no more dreams of suffocating weight. But when I woke up the next morning, the blanket was spread across my bed. I bolted upright, my heart hammering against my ribs. I ran to the window and looked out at my car. The trunk was closed, undisturbed. I grabbed my keys and ran outside in my pajamas, not caring what the neighbors might think. The trunk was empty. I stood there in my driveway shaking, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, or rather, what I wasn't seeing. There was no sign the trunk had been forced open, no scratches, no damage, and my car keys had been on my nightstand all night. Back in the house, I approached the blanket like it might bite me. It lay across my bed exactly as I'd found it, heavy and still. But as I got closer, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. There was an indentation in the mattress beneath it, a human-shaped depression, as if someone had been lying there all night. That's when I started to understand that this wasn't about the blanket at all. Someone was living in my house. I called in sick to work and spent the day searching every inch of the place. Closets, cabinets, behind furniture, in the basement, in the tiny attic space above the bedroom. Nothing. No signs of occupancy. No hidden spaces large enough for a person to hide. But that night I heard them. I'd been lying awake for hours, listening, when I caught the sound of careful footsteps in the hallway. Soft, deliberate, the kind of steps someone makes when they're trying not to be heard. I held my breath and listened as the footsteps moved closer to my bedroom door. The door handle turned slowly, silently. I closed my eyes and tried to breathe normally, to pretend I was asleep. Through my eyelashes, I could see a figure in the doorway. Tall, thin, definitely human. They stood there for what felt like hours, just watching me. Then they moved into the room. I felt the mattress dip as they sat on the edge of the bed. My bed, right next to where I was lying. The smell was overwhelming now. Not cologne or laundry detergent, but something organic and wrong. Unwashed skin and stale breath and something else. Something that reminded me of hospitals. They reached across me and I felt the weight of the blanket settling over my body. Heavy, suffocating weight that seemed to press down not just on my chest but on my lungs, my heart, my ability to think or move or scream. I tried to throw it off, but my arms wouldn't cooperate. The blanket seemed to wrap around me of its own accord, tightening like a cocoon. I could hear breathing, not my own, but someone else's right next to my ear. Sleep, a voice whispered. Male, hoarse, barely human. Just sleep. I fought against the paralysis, against the weight, against the darkness that was creeping in from the edges of my vision. With every ounce of strength I had left, I threw myself sideways, rolling off the bed and onto the floor. The blanket came with me, tangled around my legs, but I could breathe again. I could move. I scrambled toward the door, dragging the blanket behind me, and ran. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I drove straight to the police station in my pajamas, the blanket still wrapped around my ankles. The officers were kind but skeptical. They went back to the house with me, searched it thoroughly, found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no evidence of an intruder, just an empty house and a woman who'd clearly been under stress. Sometimes when people live alone, one of the officers explained gently, isolation can play tricks on the mind. Maybe you should consider staying with friends for a few days, getting some rest. I wanted to argue to make them understand, but how do you explain the impossible? How do you convince someone that a dead man's blanket had tried to suffocate you? I stayed in a hotel that night, and the next, and the next. But I had to go back eventually. I had a lease, obligations, a life to live. And maybe the officers were right. Maybe it had all been in my head. The house felt different when I returned. Lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted. The blanket was nowhere to be found, and I told myself that was a good thing. Problem solved. For 2 weeks, everything was normal. I slept through the night, woke up refreshed, went to work, came home to a house that felt like home again. I even started to laugh about the whole thing. Stress, isolation, and overactive imagination. It all made sense in retrospect. But last night I came home to find a package on my doorstep. No return address, no delivery service label. Just a box wrapped in brown paper with my name written in spidery handwriting. Inside, Carefully folded was the blanket. There was a note, tucked beneath it, written in the same shaking hand. You can't get rid of what doesn't want to leave. David learned that. Now it's your turn to sleep. I'm writing this at 3 a.m., sitting in my car in a 24-hour diner parking lot. The blanket is in my trunk again, but this time I know it won't stay there. It'll find its way back, just like it always does. Just like David probably tried to get rid of it over and over until it finally claimed him. The thing I keep coming back to, the detail that haunts me most, is what Mrs. Chen said about how they found David. Wrapped in the blanket, she said. Cocooned. But what if it wasn't just wrapped around him? What if something was wrapped around him, holding him there, keeping him still while he suffocated slowly in the heavy fabric? What if David isn't really gone at all? I can smell it now, even here in the parking lot with my windows rolled up. That organic wrong smell that follows the blanket wherever it goes. It's getting stronger, and I know that means he's getting closer. I don't think I'm going to make it through another night. If you're reading this, if someone finds this account, learn from my mistake. Some things can't be thrown away, can't be donated, can't be escaped. Some things choose you, and once they do, the only way out is the way David went out, wrapped up tight and still forever. The smell is so strong now I can barely breathe. I should start the car, drive somewhere else, but what's the point? He'll find me wherever I go. The blanket will find me, just like it found David, just like it's found me. I can see him now standing at the edge of the parking lot under a broken streetlight. Tall, thin, exactly like the figure I saw in my doorway. He's holding something dark and heavy in his arms, and even from here, I know what it is. He's coming closer. The car doors are locked, but I don't think that matters anymore. I don't think anything matters anymore except the weight that's settling over my chest. The fabric that's somehow wrapping around me even though I'm sitting in my car with all the windows up. Sleep, he whispers, though his lips don't move. Just sleep. And maybe that's not such a bad idea after all. Maybe David was right to stop fighting. Maybe we all are. The blanket is so warm, so heavy, so perfect for sleeping. Just sleeping, forever. She watches while you sleep. You know that feeling when you wake up in the middle of the night and sense someone watching you. That prickle on the back of your neck. The certainty that eyes are on you even though you're alone in the room. Most people dismiss it as imagination, a trick of the subconscious mind. I used to think the same thing. I wish I still did. It started 6 months ago when I took the night security job at Riverside Elementary. Not exactly my dream career, but after the layoffs at the factory, I needed something steady. The pay was decent. The work seemed simple enough. Walk the halls a few times each shift, check the doors, make sure no one was breaking in or vandalizing the place. Easy money, they said. The principal, Mrs. Rodriguez, gave me the tour on my first day. Typical elementary school layout. Long corridors lined with colorful bulletin boards, classrooms decorated with children's artwork, that familiar smell of crayons and cleaning supplies that takes you right back to childhood. She showed me the main office where I'd spend most of my time, the supply closets, the gym, the cafeteria. The building's been here since 1952, she explained as we walked. Solid construction, but it has its quirks. Pipes that rattle, floors that creak, that sort of thing. You'll get used to the sounds. She paused outside one classroom at the end of the east hallway. Room 14, according to the cheerful nameplate beside the door. Mrs. Patterson's second grade class. This room's been empty for a few weeks, Mrs. Rodriguez said, not quite meeting my eyes. Mrs. Patterson is on extended leave. We haven't found a replacement yet. Something in her tone made me curious. What happened to Mrs. Patterson? Mrs. Rodriguez fidgeted with her keys. She had some personal issues. Stress, you know how it is. Teaching can be demanding. That should have been my first clue that something was off, but I needed the job too badly to ask follow-up questions. The first few weeks were exactly what I'd expected. Quiet nights, routine patrols, nothing more exciting than a raccoon in the garbage bins behind the cafeteria. I'd make my rounds every hour, check in with the dispatch service, then settle back into the office with a book or my phone. The sounds Mrs. Rodriguez had mentioned were real enough. Old buildings have their own language, settling foundations, expanding metal, wind through gaps you can't see. I learned to distinguish between the normal creaks and groans and anything that might actually require investigation. That's why I noticed when the sounds from room 14 started. It began with footsteps. Soft, measured, the kind teachers make when they're moving around their classroom during quiet work time. I'd hear them during my 2 a.m. patrol, always coming from behind the closed door of the empty classroom. The first time, I assumed it was pipes in the walls or something shifting in the room above. But the pattern was too regular, too purposeful. Step, pause, like someone pacing back and forth. I tried the door handle, but it was locked. Mrs. Rodriguez had given me keys to most of the building, but not to the individual classrooms. Insurance policy, she'd explained. Less liability if the security guard can't access areas with expensive equipment or student records. I called it in to dispatch, described what I was hearing. The dispatcher took my information but didn't sound particularly concerned. Probably just the heating system, she said. These old buildings make all kinds of noise. Keep an eye on it, but don't worry too much unless you see actual signs of intrusion. But the footsteps continued night after night, always between 2 and 3 a.m. I started timing them, counting steps, mapping the pattern. 23 steps across the room, pause, 23 steps back. Over and over for exactly 47 minutes, then silence until the next night. After 2 weeks of this, I worked up the courage to peek through the window in the classroom door during one of these episodes. The room was dark, but there was enough light from the hallway emergency fixtures to make out the basic shapes. Desks arranged in neat rows, bulletin boards on the walls, the teacher's desk at the front. Everything was still and empty, but I could still hear the footsteps clear as day, coming from inside that motionless room. I mentioned it to Mrs. Rodriguez when she came in early one morning. She got that same uncomfortable look she'd had when explaining about Mrs. Patterson. The night shift can be isolating, she said carefully. Sometimes our minds play tricks on us when we're alone in a big empty building. Maybe you should consider bringing a radio or something to keep you company. She wasn't taking me seriously, but I could see something else in her expression. Not dismissal exactly, but recognition. Like she'd heard this story before. What exactly happened to Mrs. Patterson? I asked. Mrs. Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, staring at her coffee. She started having trouble sleeping, said she felt like someone was watching her at night, even at home. It got so bad she could barely function during the day. The stress was affecting her health, her teaching, everything. Did she ever mention anything about room 14, about sounds, or... I think that's enough questions. Mrs. Rodriguez cut me off. Your job is security, not investigating former employees' personal problems. But I couldn't let it go. That night, I brought a small camping chair and positioned it outside room 14 at 1:45 a.m. I wanted to be right there when the footsteps started, to see if I could figure out what was really causing them. At exactly 2:03 a.m. they began. Step, pause, step, pause. The same rhythm I'd grown to know by heart. But sitting right outside the door, I could hear something else. A soft rustling, like fabric brushing against itself. And underneath that, barely audible, what sounded like humming. A children's lullaby, sung in a voice so soft I had to hold my breath to make it out. My skin crawled. I pressed my ear against the door, straining to hear more clearly, and that's when I caught something that made my blood freeze. Breathing. Not my own. I was holding my breath. Someone else's breathing, slow and measured, coming from right on the other side of the door. I jerked away from the door so fast I knocked over my chair. The crash echoed through the empty hallway, and immediately, the sounds from room 14 stopped. Dead silence. I stood there for 10 minutes, heart pounding, waiting for the sounds to resume. They didn't. Whatever was in that room knew I was listening. The next morning, I did something I probably should have done weeks earlier. I looked up Mrs. Patterson online. It took some digging, but I found a local news article from 3 months ago. Local teacher hospitalized following breakdown. Elena Patterson, a second-grade teacher at Riverside Elementary, was admitted to Mercy General Hospital Tuesday evening after what colleagues described as a complete psychological breakdown. Patterson, 34, had been on leave from her teaching position for several weeks due to what she claimed were supernatural disturbances in her classroom and home. She kept saying someone was watching her sleep, said a colleague who wished to remain anonymous. She installed cameras, changed locks, even stayed in hotels, but nothing helped. She was convinced this person was following her everywhere. School officials declined to comment on the specifics of Patterson's claims, but confirmed she would not be returning to her position. Patterson is currently receiving treatment for severe anxiety and sleep deprivation. Her condition is listed as stable. I found 2 more articles from local paranormal investigation websites, both mentioning unexplained phenomena at Riverside Elementary. One included quotes from former night security guards who'd reported similar experiences to mine. Footsteps in empty rooms, the sensation of being watched, voices where there shouldn't be any. 3 different security guards had quit in the past. 2 years, all citing personal reasons. I should have been the 4th. Instead, I decided I needed proof. Something concrete that would either confirm I was losing my mind or validate what I was experiencing. I bought a small digital voice recorder and a motion-activated camera, both designed for hunting but perfect for capturing evidence of whatever was happening in room 14. On Thursday night, I set up the camera in the hallway, angled to capture the classroom door, and placed the recorder on the floor right outside the room. Then I retreated to my usual post in the office and waited. At 2:03 a.m., right on schedule, my phone buzzed with an alert from the camera. Motion detected. I pulled up the live feed on my phone and felt my mouth go dry. The hallway was empty, exactly as I'd left it. But the camera was recording, which meant its sensors had detected movement. I watched the screen for several minutes, seeing nothing but an empty corridor, while the motion alerts continued to ping on my phone. Something was moving in that hallway, something the camera couldn't see. The next morning, I reviewed the footage. 7 minutes of an empty hallway, the motion detector going crazy the entire time, recording absolutely nothing visible. But when I listened to the audio recording, I got everything I'd hoped for and more than I could handle. The footsteps were crystal clear. 23 steps one direction, pause, 23 steps back. But there were other sounds too. Sounds I hadn't been able to make out through the door. Whispers. Soft, almost inaudible, but definitely human. A woman's voice, speaking words I couldn't quite understand. And underneath that, a sound that made my hands shake as I listened. Papers rustling. Desk drawers opening and closing. The squeak of a chair. Someone was in that room doing normal classroom activities while I sat 30 feet away listening to an empty hallway. But the worst part came at the end of the recording. At 2:47 a.m., everything stopped. The footsteps, the whispers, the classroom sounds, all of it cut off like someone had flipped a switch. For 3 minutes there was nothing but silence. Then, clear as day, a woman's voice spoke directly into the recorder. "I know you're listening, David. My name." She knew my name. I nearly threw the recorder across the room. Instead, I sat there staring at it, my heart hammering so hard I thought I might pass out. I played the ending back 5 times, hoping I'd misheard, but there was no mistake. She knew I was there. She knew who I was, and somehow, impossibly, she knew I was listening. That should have been the end of it. I should have walked away, found another job, moved to another state if necessary. Instead, I made the mistake of thinking I could handle it, that I could coexist with whatever was happening in room 14 as long as I kept my distance. But she had other plans. The first sign was the phone calls. I'd started getting them at home during the day while I was trying to sleep. The caller ID always showed the school's main number, but when I'd answer, there would be nothing but silence. Sometimes I'd hear breathing, the same slow, measured rhythm I'd heard through the classroom door. When I called the school to ask about it, Mrs. Rodriguez swore no one had been making calls from the building. The phone system was locked down. During off hours, she said. Impossible for calls to go out without administrative access. But the calls continued. 2-3 times a day, always during the hours when I should have been sleeping. Then she started appearing in my dreams. Not clearly at first, just a presence at the edge of my vision, a figure standing in dark corners or at the foot of my bed. But gradually she became more distinct. A tall woman with long dark hair wearing a cardigan and skirt like a teacher might wear. She never spoke in the dreams, just watched me with eyes that seemed too bright in the darkness. I'd wake up exhausted, feeling like I hadn't slept at all. Dark circles appeared under my eyes. I started making mistakes at work, missing things, during my patrols, falling asleep at the security desk. That's when I realized what had happened to Mrs. Patterson. She hadn't had a breakdown from stress. She'd been systematically stripped of her ability to sleep, to rest, to function normally. Whoever this was, whatever this was, it didn't just haunt room 14. It followed people home. It was following me home. I tried everything Mrs. Patterson had tried. I installed security cameras in my apartment, changed my locks, even spent a few nights in a hotel across town. Nothing worked. The phone calls found my cell phone. The dreams followed me wherever I slept, and she was getting stronger. The dreams became more vivid, more interactive. She'd walk closer to my bed, lean over me, whisper things I couldn't remember when I woke up, but that left me feeling hollow and afraid. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of her during the day, a reflection in a store window, a figure at the end of an empty street, always watching, always waiting. I stopped going to room 14 during my patrols. I avoided that entire hallway if I could help it. But it didn't matter. She'd moved beyond the classroom now. I was her new project, her new victim. Last week, I finally worked up the courage to visit Mrs. Patterson at the psychiatric facility where she was staying. I needed to know if she'd found a way to make it stop, if there was something I could do to break free from whatever had its hooks in me. I found her in the common room, staring out a window at the parking lot. She looked like she'd aged 10 years in the few months since her breakdown. Her hair was streaked with gray, her face gaunt and hollow-eyed. When I introduced myself and mentioned Riverside Elementary, she grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "You're the new security guard," she said. "The one in room 14. I heard about you." "Heard about me? From who?" Her grip tightened. "She talks about you in the dreams. She says you're a good listener, says you pay attention. My blood went cold. Mrs. Patterson, who is she? What does she want? She was a teacher there, long time. Go. 1970s, I think. Margaret something. She died in that room during a parent conference, heart attack. They found her the next morning, slumped over her desk. Mrs. Patterson's eyes were wild now, darting around the room like she was looking for someone. But she never left. She continued. She's still teaching, still watching over her classroom. And when someone new comes along, someone who might understand, she tries to make them stay too. Stay? What do you mean? She wants a friend, someone to talk to during those long nights. She tried to get me to stay in the classroom overnight, to sleep at my desk like she does. When I wouldn't, Mrs. Patterson shuddered. When I wouldn't, she followed me home. She wanted to make sure I couldn't sleep anywhere else either. How do I make it stop? Mrs. Patterson laughed, but there was no humor in it. You don't. She's patient. She has all the time in the world. Eventually, you'll be so tired, so desperate for rest that staying in that classroom will seem like the only option. And then you become like her. Another teacher who never left. I left the facility feeling worse than when I'd arrived. That night, I barely slept at all. She was in my dreams constantly now, no longer content to watch from a distance. She'd sit on the edge of my bed, stroke my hair, whisper about lesson plans and parent conferences and how lonely it got in room 14 after dark. You understand? She'd say in that soft, sing-song voice. You know what it's like to work alone at night. We could keep each other company. I started drinking coffee by the pot, taking caffeine pills, doing anything to stay awake. But you can only fight sleep for so long before your body starts shutting down whether you want it to or not. 3 nights ago, I fell asleep at my security desk around 1 a.m. I woke up at dawn, and the first thing I noticed was that I felt rested for the first time in weeks, really truly rested. The second thing I noticed was that I was in room 14. I was sitting at the teacher's desk at the front of the classroom, my head pillowed on my arms like I'd dozed off while grading papers. The morning sun was streaming through, the windows illuminating rows of empty student desks and colorful bulletin boards that definitely hadn't been there before. On the whiteboard behind me, written in neat cursive handwriting, was a message. Welcome to 2nd grade. I knew you'd fit right in. I ran. I ran out of that classroom, out of the building, all the way to my car. I drove home, packed everything I owned into 2 suitcases, and bought a bus ticket to Denver that same afternoon. But you can't run from something that lives in your dreams. She found me in Denver within a week. She found me in Phoenix after that. Now I'm in Seattle, writing this in a 24-hour diner because I'm afraid to go back to my hotel room, afraid to close my eyes, afraid of what I might find when I wake up. The truth is, I'm so tired I can barely think straight. I haven't had a full night's sleep in over a month. I keep catching myself nodding off at inappropriate times, while walking, while eating, while sitting in this booth trying to write down everything that's happened. And in those brief moments, when sleep takes me, she's always there. Come home, David, she whispers. Come back to room 14. I have your desk ready. I have lesson plans for us to review. I know what she's doing. Mrs. Patterson was right. She's wearing me down, making me so desperate for rest that eventually her offer will seem reasonable. A comfortable chair, a quiet classroom, a place to finally sleep. All I have to do is go back. Part of me is starting to think that wouldn't be so bad. What's the worst that could happen? So what if I become another night security guard who disappeared under mysterious circumstances? So what if some future employee finds my body slumped over a desk in room 14? At least I'd be able to sleep. The waitress just came by to refill my coffee cup. and I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the metal napkin dispenser. I looked like Mrs. Patterson did in that hospital. Hollow-eyed, gaunt, aged beyond my years. How long can a person go without sleep? I remember reading somewhere that it's about 11 days before your body starts shutting down permanently. I think I'm getting close to that limit. My phone just buzzed. A text from an unknown number, but I know who it's from. The classroom is empty without you. The children miss their security guard. Come home. She's found me again. She'll always find me. I'm going to finish this coffee, maybe order some pie, try to stay awake for a few more hours, but I can feel myself slipping, feel the exhaustion pulling me down like quicksand. When I finally give in, when I finally let sleep take me, I know where I'll wake up. Room 14 is waiting. She's waiting. And maybe, after all this time fighting it, maybe that's exactly where I belong. The dreams are calling, and I'm too tired to resist anymore. Just too tired to. The account ends here. David Morrison was reported missing from his Seattle hotel 3 days later. A week after that, Riverside Elementary's new night security guard reported strange sounds coming from room 14. The cycle continues. Nightmare room 13. I've never been one to believe in coincidences, but sometimes life forces your hand. It was late March when I found myself standing in the lobby of the Riverside Motor Lodge, clutching a crumpled $20 bill and praying they'd have a room available. My car had broken down 40 miles outside of town, and the tow truck driver had dropped me off here with a shrug and a promise that my vehicle would be ready sometime tomorrow, maybe the day after. The lobby smelled like stale cigarettes and industrial disinfectant. The carpet was a faded burgundy with mysterious stains that looked like they'd been there since the Carter administration. Behind the front desk sat a woman in her 60s, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, reading what looked like a romance novel. She glanced up when I approached, and I noticed her eyes were an unusual pale blue, almost colorless. "Need a room?" she asked, setting down her book. "Just for the night," I replied. "Maybe two, depending on when my car's fixed." She turned to a pegboard behind her, scanning the keys. Most of the hooks were empty, not surprising for a place like this on a Tuesday night in a town that barely qualified as a dot on the map. Her fingers paused over one particular key, then moved past it to grab another. "Room 14, she said, sliding a brass key across the counter. $50 a night, cash only. I handed over the money and signed the register with a pen that had seen better decades. As I turned to leave, I noticed her watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Breakfast is served until 9, she called after me. "And if you hear any noise from 13, just ignore it. Sometimes the pipes act up." Room 13. I glanced at the pegboard and noticed that key 13 was still hanging there, alone among the empty hooks. Something about the way she'd mentioned it made me pause, but I was too tired to think much about it. The room was exactly what I'd expected. A sagging double bed with a floral comforter that had seen better days, a small television bolted to a particle board dresser, and a bathroom that looked clean enough if you didn't look too closely. The air conditioning unit under the window rattled like it was trying to shake itself apart, but it blew cold air, and that was good enough for me. I called my wife to let her know I'd be late getting home, ordered a pizza from the only place that would deliver to the motel, and settled in for what I hoped would be an uneventful night. The pizza arrived around 8, a thin, greasy disc that tasted better than it looked, and I ate it while watching a basketball game on the fuzzy television. That's when I first heard the sounds from next door. It started as a low scraping noise like furniture being dragged across the floor. Then came a rhythmic thumping, followed by what sounded like muffled voices. I checked the time, 9:47 p.m. Not unreasonably late, and people had a right to move their furniture around if they wanted to. I turned up the volume on the TV and tried to ignore it. The sounds continued for about 20 minutes, then stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was somehow more unsettling than the noise had been. I found myself listening intently, waiting for it to resume, but room 13 had gone completely quiet. I managed to drift off around midnight, but I woke up at 2:17 a.m. to the sound of voices. Not loud voices, quite the opposite. They were speaking in whispers, but the walls were thin enough that I could hear the cadence of conversation without being able to make out the words. 2 people, maybe 3, having what sounded like an urgent discussion. I lay there in the dark, listening. Something about those whispered voices bothered me in a way I couldn't articulate. They had a conspiratorial quality, like people planning something they didn't want overheard. The conversation went on for perhaps 10 minutes before fading away, leaving me staring at the ceiling until dawn. The next morning, I grabbed a cup of coffee and a stale Danish from the continental breakfast set up in the lobby. The same woman was behind the desk, though she'd traded her romance novel for a crossword puzzle. When I mentioned the sounds from room 13, she looked up with those pale, unsettling eyes. "I told you the pipes act up," she said. "Old building, lots of strange noises." "It sounded like voices," I said. "Pipes can sound like all sorts of things." Her tone suggested the conversation was over. I spent the day at the garage watching a mechanic who looked like he'd learned his trade during the Eisenhower administration poke around under my hood and mutter about fuel pumps and electrical systems. By evening, it was clear my car wouldn't be ready until the following day at the earliest. Back at the motel, I noticed something odd. The parking space in front of room 13 was empty, just as it had been the night before. If someone was staying there, where was their car? I walked past the window of room 13 on my way to 14, and the curtains were drawn tight. No light seeped through the gaps. That evening, I decided to be more systematic about the sounds. I positioned myself near the wall that separated my room from 13 and waited. At exactly 9:45 p.m., the scraping started again. This time, I pressed my ear to the wall and listened carefully. It wasn't furniture being moved. The sound was more organic somehow, like something heavy being dragged across the floor. And underneath the scraping, I could swear I heard a faint whimpering so quiet I might have imagined it. The whimpering stopped, but the scraping continued for another few minutes. Then came the voices again, those same urgent whispers. I strained to make out even a single word, but the sound was too muffled, the words too distorted by the wall between us. Around 11 p.m., everything went quiet. But this time, I didn't try to sleep. I sat in the chair by the window and kept watch on room 13. The curtains never moved, no light ever appeared, but I had the strangest feeling that someone was in there, watching back. At 2:30 a.m., I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure emerged from room 13, not through the door, but from around the back of the building. It was too dark to make out details, but it looked like a man carrying something over his shoulder. Something long and wrapped in what might have been a blanket or tarp. I watched him load his burden into the trunk of a dark sedan that had been parked behind the building, out of sight from the main lot. Then he drove away with his headlights, off until he reached the main road. 20 minutes later, he was back. This time, he wasn't carrying anything. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every small sound made me jump. Every settling of the old building's bones seemed amplified in the darkness. When morning finally came, I was exhausted and on edge, but I knew I had to find out what was happening in room 13. At breakfast, I approached the desk clerk again. This time I noticed a name tag I'd missed before. Dorothy. "Dorothy," I said, trying to sound casual. "I was wondering, Is room 13 occupied? Her pale eyes fixed on me with new intensity. Why do you ask? Just curious. I heard voices again last night, and I saw someone leaving the room around 2:30. Something flickered across her face, surprise maybe, or concern. She was quiet for a long moment, studying me like she was trying to decide something. Room 13 has been vacant for 3 weeks, she finally said. Nobody's staying there. The words hit me like a physical blow. If the room was vacant, then who had I seen? And what had he been carrying? Are you sure? I asked. I'm sure. Her voice was flat, final. Maybe you should mind your own business, son. Some things are better left alone. There was something in her tone that sent a chill down my spine. Not just a warning, a threat. I spent the day at the garage again, but my mind wasn't on carburetors and spark plugs. I kept thinking about that figure I'd seen, the way he'd moved with such purpose, such familiarity with his surroundings. And that bundle he'd carried, the size and shape of it haunted me. The mechanic finally got my car running around 5 p.m. She'll get you home, he said, wiping his hands on a greasy rag. But you might want to think about a new fuel pump soon. Should have left immediately. Should have loaded my bag, checked out, and driven straight home. Instead, I found myself back in room 14, ostensibly to pack, but really to satisfy the growing obsession that had taken hold of me. I had to know what was happening in room 13. As darkness fell, I positioned myself by the window with a clear view of both the front and side of the motel. At 9:30, the dark sedan pulled into the back lot again. Same routine. The figure emerged from behind the building, entered room 13 through what must have been a back door or window I couldn't see. This time I was ready. I slipped out of my room and crept along the building's exterior wall. The night was overcast, with only a sliver of moon providing any illumination. As I reached the back corner of the building, I could see room 13's rear window. It was partially open and a faint light flickered inside. Not electric light, but something dimmer. Candlelight, maybe. I crept closer, my heart hammering in my chest. Through the gap in the curtains, I could see into the room, and what I saw made my legs nearly give out. The room had been completely transformed. The furniture was pushed against the walls, and the floor was covered with plastic sheeting. In the center of the room, a man in his 40s knelt beside what looked like a large tarp or canvas spread on the floor. He was working methodically, his hands moving with practiced precision. It took my brain several seconds to process what I was seeing. The tarp wasn't empty. There was something inside it, something human-shaped. The man looked up suddenly, as if he'd sensed my presence. In the dim candlelight, I could see his face clearly for the first time. He was younger than I'd expected, with thinning hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He looked like an accountant or a bank teller, completely ordinary except for the latex, gloves on his hands, and the expression of cold concentration on his face. Our eyes met through the window. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he smiled, a slow, terrible smile that revealed teeth stained yellow by candlelight. I ran. I stumbled back to my room, hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the lock. Once inside, I grabbed my bag and threw my belongings into it without any regard for organization. I had to get out of there, had to get away from whatever was happening in room 13. But as I reached for the door handle, I heard footsteps outside. Slow, measured footsteps approaching my room. They stopped right outside my door. I held my breath and waited. The footsteps moved away, but I knew he was still out there, waiting, watching. I moved to the window and peered through the curtains. The man from room 13 was standing in the parking lot, looking directly at my window. He raised one gloved hand and waved at me. a mockingly friendly gesture that made my skin crawl. Then he pulled out a cell phone and made a call. The conversation was brief, and when it ended, he walked back toward room 13. But he didn't go inside. Instead, he positioned himself where he could watch both my room and the parking area. I was trapped. Hours passed. I sat in the chair by the window, afraid to move, afraid to make any sound that might alert him to my presence. Periodically, I would check the parking lot, and he was always there. Sometimes sitting on the hood of his sedan, sometimes leaning against the building, but always watching. Around 3 a.m., another car arrived. A beat-up pickup truck that parked next to the sedan. 2 more men got out, one tall and thin, the other short and stocky. They conferred with the man from room 13 in whispers, occasionally glancing toward my room. That's when I realized the truth. This wasn't just one disturbed individual. This was organized, professional, and somehow I'd stumbled into the middle of their operation. The 3 men split up. The tall one walked to the front of the building and positioned himself near the lobby entrance. The stocky one moved to the back, blocking that exit. The man from room 13 remained in the center, still watching my window. I was completely surrounded. My phone had no signal. Not unusual for a rural area, but convenient. For them, the room phone was dead when I tried it. Even if I could call for help, what would I tell them? That I'd seen something suspicious through a motel window? By the time anyone responded, I'd be long gone, and room 13 would be just another vacant room with faded wallpaper and mysterious stains. As dawn approached, I made a decision. I couldn't stay in that room forever, and I couldn't wait for them to make the first move. My car was parked directly in front of my room. Maybe I could reach it before they could react. I gathered my courage and my car keys, took a deep breath, and opened the door. The parking lot was empty. All 3 men had vanished, along with their vehicles. It was as if they'd never been there at all. But I knew better than to trust the apparent safety. I ran to my car, threw my bag in the back seat, and drove away as fast as I dared. I didn't stop until I was 50 miles down the road and the sun was well above the horizon. Only then did I pull over at a gas station and try to process what had happened. I called the local police from a payphone, but my story sounded unbelievable even to me. A suspicious man in a motel room who might have been doing something to a body-shaped object? 3 men who surrounded my room but disappeared without a trace? The desk clerk who claimed the room was vacant. The officer who took my statement was polite but skeptical. He promised to send someone to check on the motel, but his tone suggested he thought I was either drunk or delusional. I never heard back from them. That was 6 months ago. I've tried to put the experience behind me, tried to convince myself that I misunderstood what I saw, that fear and darkness played tricks on my perception. But late at night, when I'm lying in bed trying to sleep, I remember that terrible smile, those pale eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, the casual way he waved at me through the window. I've done some research since then, looked into missing persons reports from that area, searched for news articles about the Riverside Motor Lodge. What I found disturbs me more than what happened that night. Over the past 5 years at least, a dozen people have disappeared from that stretch of highway. Travelers whose cars broke down, truckers who stopped for the night, tourists who took the scenic route, all of them last seen in the vicinity of the motel. All of them vanished without a trace. The pattern is always the same. Car trouble, a night at the Riverside Motor Lodge, then nothing. No credit card usage, no phone calls, no sightings. Just empty lives and grieving families and police reports that eventually go cold. I think about Dorothy sometimes, the desk clerk with those colorless eyes. I wonder how long she's been working there. how many travelers she's checked into room 14 while 13 remains vacant. I wonder what she gets out of it. Money, protection, or just the twisted satisfaction of being part of something monstrous. Most of all, I think about that night when I almost became another statistic, another missing person whose fate would never be known. The only thing that saved me was pure chance. The fact that I happened to be awake and looking out the window at exactly the right moment. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't seen him loading that bundle into his trunk. Would I have slept through the night only to wake up to a knock on my door? Would Dorothy have checked me out with that same bland expression, knowing it was the last time anyone would see me alive? I'll never know for certain, but I do know this. Somewhere out there, on a lonely stretch of highway, the Riverside Motor Lodge is still open for business. Dorothy is still behind the front desk with her romance novels and crossword puzzles. Room 13 is still vacant, and room 14 is still available for $50 a night, cash only. And every few weeks, someone's car breaks down 40 miles outside of town. Someone who needs a place to stay, just for the night. Someone who won't be missed until it's too late. The worst part isn't the knowledge that it's still happening. The worst part is knowing that I could have stopped it. Could have done something more than make a half-hearted call to a skeptical police officer. Instead, I drove away and tried to forget. And somewhere in the darkness of that terrible place, the work in room 13 continues. I still have nightmares about it. Dreams where I'm back in room 14, watching through the window as that dark sedan pulls into the parking lot. Dreams where I'm the one wrapped in plastic sheeting looking up at wire-rimmed glasses and a yellow-toothed smile. But the real nightmare is waking up and knowing that for someone else, somewhere else, it's not a dream at all. It's just another night at the Riverside Motor Lodge where room 13 is always vacant, and the pipes in the walls make the strangest sounds. Just ignore it, Dorothy would say. Sometimes the pipes act up, but we both know it's not the pipes at all. Silent screams at 3 a.m. There's something about 3 a.m. that feels different from any other hour. It's when the world holds its breath, when the barrier between sleep and waking becomes thin as paper. Medical professionals call it the witching hour, the time when the human body is at its most vulnerable, when more people die in hospitals than at any other time of day. I never understood why until I started working the overnight shift at Mercy General's psychiatric ward. The job wasn't my first choice, but after graduating with my nursing degree, you take what you can get. The overnight differential pay was decent, and frankly, I preferred the idea of fewer administrators breathing down my neck. Night shifts meant more autonomy, more time to actually focus on patient care instead of paperwork and politics. Dr. Sarah Whitman, the head of psychiatry, gave me the orientation tour on my first evening. Mercy General's psychiatric wing was newer than the rest of the hospital, built in the 1990s with all the modern safety features and calming design elements that were supposed to create a therapeutic environment. Soft lighting, pastel colors, rounded corners on everything to prevent self-harm. We have 43 beds, Dr. Whitman explained as we walked the corridors, usually running at about 60% capacity, mix of voluntary and involuntary commitments, various diagnoses. The night shift is generally quieter. Most patients are medicated and sleeping. She paused outside the nurses' station, a central hub with windows overlooking 2 hallways of patient rooms. The important thing to remember, she continued, is that psychiatric patients often have disrupted sleep patterns. You might encounter some wandering, some confusion, occasionally someone who can't sleep. That's normal. What's not normal is panic. If you feel overwhelmed or unsafe, call security immediately. I nodded, taking mental notes. It seemed straightforward. Enough. There is one thing, Dr. Whitman added, her tone shifting slightly. We've had some incidents during the night shift. Nothing dangerous, just unusual. Patients reporting strange sounds, claiming they hear things that aren't there. It's likely just the acoustics of the building. Old buildings settle, pipes make noise, that sort of thing. What kind of sounds? Crying mostly, sometimes screaming. But when we investigate, everyone's asleep. It's probably just auditory hallucinations brought on by their medications or conditions. She didn't sound entirely convinced by her own explanation. My first few weeks were exactly what she'd described. Quiet nights, routine medication rounds, the occasional patient who couldn't sleep and wanted to talk. I learned to navigate the building's quirks, which doors squeaked, which floors creaked, where the vending machines hummed loudest. The psych ward had its own rhythm after dark. Most patients were heavily medicated and slept soundly, but there were always a few who struggled with insomnia or night terrors. I'd make my rounds every hour, checking on everyone, administering PRN medications when needed, charting everything meticulously. It was during my third week that I first heard what Dr. Whitman had mentioned. I was at the nurses' station around 2:45 a.m., updating patient charts when I heard it. A sound like someone crying. Not loud, but persistent. A soft, muffled sobbing that seemed to echo through the hallways. I checked the security monitors first. Every patient room was visible from the cameras, and I could see the shapes of sleeping bodies in their beds. No one was sitting up. No one appeared to be in distress. But the crying continued. I did a walking round, moving quietly from room to room, listening at each door. The sound seemed to follow me, always coming from somewhere just out of reach. When I'd stop to listen more carefully, it would fade, only to resume when I moved on. After 20 minutes of searching, I finally gave up. When I returned to the nurses' station, the crying had stopped. I mentioned it to Janet, the day shift supervisor, when she came in that morning. "Oh, you heard it too," she said, not sounding surprised. "Yeah, that happens sometimes. We've never been able to figure out where it's coming from. Could be the ventilation system or sound carrying from another part of the hospital. Have you ever called maintenance to check?" "Multiple times. They can't find anything wrong. The acoustics in this place are weird. Sound bounces around in ways you wouldn't expect." That explanation made sense, so I filed it away and didn't think much more about it until it happened again and again. The crying became a regular occurrence, always between 2:30 and 3:30 a.m., always impossible to locate. I started timing it, taking notes, trying to find a pattern. Some nights it lasted 5 minutes, others nearly an hour. Sometimes it sounded like a child, other times like an adult. Always muffled, always distant, always just beyond my ability to pinpoint its source. After a month of this, I decided to be more systematic about investigating. I brought a small digital recorder to work, hoping to capture the sound and maybe get maintenance to take it more seriously if I had audio evidence. The first few nights with the recorder were silent. Whatever was causing the crying seemed to have stopped. I was starting to think I'd imagined the whole thing when it started up again on a Tuesday night in November. 7 a.m. Soft sobbing, coming from somewhere in the east hallway. I grabbed the recorder and started walking, holding it out in front of me like a divining rod. The crying was clearer than I'd ever heard it before. Definitely human, definitely distressed. A woman's voice, I thought, though it was hard to be certain. I followed the sound down the east hallway past the patient rooms toward the emergency exit at the far end. The crying grew louder as I approached, and for the first time I could make out words between the sobs. "Please," the voice whispered. "Please help me." I stopped dead in my tracks. This wasn't some acoustic anomaly or settling building. Someone was in distress and they were asking for help. I moved faster now, checking each room more thoroughly. Every patient was accounted for, all asleep or resting quietly. But the voice was getting clearer, more desperate. Please, I can't breathe. The sound was coming from the very end of the hallway near the emergency exit, but there was nothing there, just a locked door leading to a stairwell and a small supply closet. I tried the supply closet first. Unlocked, filled with the usual medical supplies and cleaning equipment. Empty of people. The emergency exit was alarmed, and the alarm status light showed it hadn't been opened. But the crying was definitely coming from that direction. That's when I noticed something I'd never paid attention to before. A small door set into the wall next to the emergency exit. No bigger than a typical bedroom door, painted the same institutional beige as the walls. There was no handle, just a small rectangular access panel. I pressed my ear against the door and felt my blood go cold. The crying was coming from behind it. "Hello?" I called softly. "Is someone in there?" The crying stopped immediately. I waited for several minutes listening but heard nothing more. I tried to find a way to open the access panel, but it seemed to require a special key or tool I didn't have. The next morning I asked Janet about the door. "That's just an old utility access," she said. "Probably electrical or HVAC equipment. It's been sealed for years, since before I started working here." "Sealed? You mean no one can get in there?" "That's right. Why?" I explained what I had heard, how the crying had seemed to come from behind that door. Janet got a strange look on her face. "Emma," she said slowly, "you're not the first person to mention that door." "What do you mean?" "We've had 3 different night shift nurses over the past 5 years report the same thing. Crying sounds, voices calling for help, all seeming to come from that utility access." My skin prickled. "What happened to those nurses?" "They all transferred to other units. Said the night shift in psych was too stressful." That afternoon I did some research on my own. I went to the hospital's administrative offices and asked to see the building plans for the psychiatric ward. It took some convincing, but the facilities manager eventually pulled up the blueprints on his computer. The space behind that door wasn't a utility closet. According to the original building plans from 1994, it was marked as Patient Room 47, a standard room identical to all the others on the ward. "Why is this room sealed off?" I asked the facilities manager. He scrolled through several screens of information, frowning. Says here it was taken out of service in 1997, converted to storage space. Do you have records of why?" "Not in the system I can access. You'd have to talk to someone who was here back then." I found Dr. Whitman in her office an hour before my shift started. "Room 47, she repeated when I asked about it. I wasn't here in 97, but I remember hearing about it from Dr. Martinez, my predecessor. "What did you hear?" Dr. Whitman was quiet for a long moment, organizing papers on her desk. "There was a patient death. A young woman, early 20s, suicide, I believe, very tragic case." "And they sealed the room because of that?" "Not immediately, but apparently there were complaints from other patients, claims about noises from that room even after it was empty. Some patients refused to stay in rooms near it. Eventually, it was easier to just convert it to storage space than deal with the ongoing issues." My shift started at 11 p.m., and I couldn't concentrate on anything except room 47. I found myself gravitating toward that end of the hallway during my rounds, listening for any sounds from behind the sealed door. At 2:58 a.m. they started, but this time was different. Instead of crying, I heard knocking. Rhythmic, insistent knocking coming from inside the sealed room. Then a voice, clearer than I'd ever heard before. Please, someone help me. I can't get out. I ran to the nurse's station and called security. 2 guards arrived within minutes, and I led them to the end of the hallway. Silence. I don't hear anything, one of the guards said after we'd stood there for 5 minutes. It was just a few minutes ago. Knocking and someone calling for help. They exchanged glances. Ma'am, you said this room has been sealed for 25 years. There's no way anyone could be in there. But as they were speaking, I heard it again. Faint knocking, like someone tapping on the other side of the wall. There. Do you hear that? They listened carefully, then shook their heads. We don't hear anything, ma'am. Maybe you should take a break, get some air. After they left, I stood alone in the hallway, staring at the sealed door. I was starting to understand why 3 other nurses had transferred away from this unit. But I couldn't let it go. The next night, I brought a stethoscope to work. When the sound started again at 3 a.m., I pressed it against the sealed door and listened. What I heard nearly made me drop the stethoscope. Breathing. Slow, labored breathing, like someone struggling for air. And underneath that, a scratching sound, like fingernails against wood or drywall. Who's in there? I whispered against the door. The breathing stopped. Then, so clearly, I could have sworn the person was standing right next to me. My name is Rebecca. I've been in here so long, please, I just want to go home. I jerked away from the door, my heart hammering. This wasn't my imagination. This wasn't building acoustics or auditory hallucinations. Someone named Rebecca was behind that door, and she was asking for help. I called the facilities manager at home, waking him up, demanding that he come in immediately to open room 47. Ma'am, I can't authorize that without proper work orders and administrative approval. And frankly, what you're describing isn't possible. That room has been sealed since 1997. No one could be alive in there. Then explained the voice I just heard. I can't. But I can tell you that room is smaller than a walk-in closet now. We walled off most of it when we converted the space. Even if someone had somehow gotten trapped in there decades ago, there wouldn't be enough air to survive. After he hung up, I sat at the nurse's station trying to process what he'd told me. If the room had been partially walled off, made smaller, then what I was hearing was impossible. But I knew what I'd heard. I spent the rest of my shift researching Rebecca. Hospital records from 1997 were partially digitized, and it took hours of searching. But I finally found her. Rebecca Chen, age 23, admitted to the psychiatric ward in March 1997 for severe depression and suicidal ideation. She'd been found dead in her room on March 15th. Cause of death listed as asphyxiation by hanging. Room 47. According to the incident report, Rebecca had been on suicide watch, with checks every 15 minutes. But somehow, in the brief window between checks, she'd managed to fashion a noose from torn bedsheets and hang herself from the light fixture. The report noted that she'd been heard crying and calling for help for several hours before her death, but staff had assumed it was related to her psychiatric condition. No one had realized she was in actual physical distress until it was too late. I stared at the report, feeling sick. Rebecca had died calling for help, and no one had listened. No one had saved her. And now, 26 years later, she was still calling. The next night I came prepared. I'd brought a crowbar from home hidden in my nursing bag. If the hospital wouldn't open room 47 officially, I'd do it myself. At 3 a.m., when the sound started again, I went to the end of the hallway with my crowbar and started working on the access panel. It was painted over and sealed tight, but the panel itself was just thin metal. After 10 minutes of prying, it popped open. Behind it was a larger access panel, this one secured with screws. But I could see light seeping around the edges, and I could hear Rebecca more clearly than ever. "Please hurry," she whispered. "I can't breathe, it's so dark in here." I worked frantically with a screwdriver I'd brought, removing screw after screw. My hands were shaking so badly I kept dropping them. But I could hear Rebecca encouraging me, telling me I was almost there, that she could see the light from the hallway. Finally, the panel came free. Behind it was a space about the size of a telephone booth, all that remained of room 47 after the renovation. And hanging from a makeshift noose made of rotted bed sheets was a mummified corpse in a hospital gown. Rebecca. She'd been here all along, trapped in this tiny space when they'd walled off her room. Somehow, impossibly, she'd survived the renovation, survived being sealed in, only to die slowly of dehydration and starvation in a space no bigger than a coffin. But that was impossible. The hospital records clearly showed she'd died in 1997. I'd read the autopsy report myself. I stared at the corpse, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, when I heard footsteps behind me. "What have you done?" I turned to find Dr. Whitman standing in the hallway, flanked by 2 security guards. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with something that looked like terror. "She's been in here all along," I said, pointing to the corpse. "Rebecca Chen. She didn't kill herself in 1997. She was trapped when you renovated the room." Dr. Whitman stepped closer, peering into the tiny space. When she saw the body, she stumbled backward. "That's not possible," she whispered. "We found her body. We buried her." "Then who is this?" Dr. Whitman was staring at the corpse, her hands shaking. "I don't know, but this explains everything." "What do you mean?" "The sounds, the voices, the reason 3 other nurses transferred away from this unit. She's been trying to get someone's attention for 26 years. One of the security guards had called the police, and within an hour, the hallway was full of investigators, photographers, and medical personnel. The corpse was carefully removed and taken to the coroner's office for examination. The preliminary findings were as impossible as everything else about this case. The body showed signs of having died recently, within the past few days, not decades ago. But the clothing, the bed sheets, even the dust patterns in the tiny space all suggested it had been there much longer. The coroner couldn't explain it. The police couldn't explain it. Even the hospital administrators, who were frantically reviewing records and trying to figure out how a patient could have been accidentally sealed into a wall, couldn't explain it. But I think I understand. Rebecca died in room 47 in 1997, exactly as the records show. But when they renovated the space, when they walled off most of the room and converted it to storage, something went wrong. Instead of moving on, instead of finding peace, Rebecca became trapped, not physically but spiritually, caught between life and death in that tiny remaining space. For 26 years, she'd been trying to get someone's attention, trying to get someone to help her. And every time she'd almost succeeded, every time a night shift nurse had heard her cries and started investigating, she'd been dismissed as imagination or building noises. Until me. I quit my job at Mercy General the next day. I couldn't go back to that ward. Couldn't walk past that empty space where room 47 used to be, knowing what I'd found there. But I think about Rebecca a lot. I think about how she spent decades calling for help, screaming into the darkness with no one to hear her. How she died not once, but over and over again, trapped in that tiny space with no escape. The hospital sealed up the access panel again, officially this time. They claimed it was for safety reasons, but I know better. They don't want anyone else to hear what I heard, to find what I found. They don't want anyone else to know that sometimes the dead don't rest. Sometimes they just keep screaming. And sometimes, if you listen carefully at 3 a.m. when the world is at its quietest and the barriers are at their thinnest, you might hear them too. Silent screams that echo through walls and time, calling for someone, anyone, to help them find their way home. I hear Rebecca sometimes, even now, even though I'm living 2 states away and working day shifts at a different hospital. She finds me in my dreams, still asking for help, still trapped in that tiny space between life and death. "Please," she whispers. "Please don't forget me." "I won't, Rebecca. I'll never forget." But I wish I could forget the sound of her voice, the desperation in her pleas, the knowledge that there are others like her, caught between worlds, screaming silently into the dark, waiting for someone brave enough or foolish enough to listen. The dead don't always rest in peace. Sometimes they just rest in pieces, scattered across the spaces between what was and what is, calling out for help that may never come. And somewhere, in hospitals and homes and forgotten spaces all over the world, they're still screaming, still waiting, still hoping someone will hear. Haunted slumber sleep has always been my refuge. Even as a kid, when the world felt too big and overwhelming, I could close my eyes and disappear into dreams that made more sense than reality. That's probably why I became a sleep technician. There's something peaceful about watching people drift off in the lab, their brain waves dancing across the monitors like gentle music. I've been working at the Millbrook Sleep Clinic for 8 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything. People who sleepwalk, people who scream in their sleep, people whose breathing stops dozens of times a night. The human brain does strange things when consciousness fades, but it's all explainable, scientific, safe. That changed 3 months ago when Marcus Webb became our patient. Marcus was referred to us by his primary care physician after months of chronic insomnia. He was in his early 30s, worked as a software engineer, lived alone in a downtown apartment. Nothing unusual about him except for the dark circles under his eyes and the way his hands shook slightly when he filled out the intake forms. "I haven't slept more than 2 hours at a stretch in 4 months, he told me during his consultation. "And when I do sleep, the dreams." He trailed off, running a hand through his unwashed hair. "The dreams are getting worse. I see a lot of people who are afraid to sleep. Nightmares, sleep paralysis, recurring dreams that feel too real. It's more common than you'd think." But there was something different about Marcus. He looked haunted in a way that went beyond simple sleep deprivation. "Can you tell me about the dreams?" I asked. He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. "They're not really dreams," he finally said. "They're more like visits. Someone comes to see me when I'm sleeping. Someone who shouldn't be there." The first night study showed exactly what I expected. Fragmented sleep, frequent awakenings, very little REM activity. His brain was so exhausted it could barely maintain the basic sleep cycles. But there was something else on the recordings that caught my attention. During the brief periods when Marcus did enter deeper sleep, his brain activity spiked in unusual patterns. The EEG showed bursts of theta waves that looked almost like seizure activity, but they weren't seizures. They were something else entirely, like his brain was responding to external stimuli that shouldn't have existed in a sealed, monitored room. "Did you notice anything unusual during the night?" I asked him the next morning. Marcus looked terrible, somehow more exhausted than when he'd arrived. "She was there," he said simply, "in the corner of the room, watching me sleep." I checked the video recordings. The infrared cameras had captured every moment of the night, and Marcus had been alone in the room the entire time. No one had entered or left. The door had remained locked, the windows sealed. Yet according to the EEG data, something had definitely been affecting him during his brief periods of sleep. "Marcus," I said gently, "the room was empty all night. You were alone." He looked at me with eyes that were bloodshot and desperate. "I know how it sounds, but she's real. She's been visiting me for months and she's getting stronger. That should have been the end of it. Sleep deprivation causes hallucinations. It's well documented. Marcus needed medication, therapy, maybe both. But something about his case nagged at me. Those brainwave patterns didn't match any known sleep disorder, and there was a consistency to his reports that suggested more than random hallucinations. Against my better judgment, I decided to conduct an extended study, 3 consecutive nights with full monitoring, EEG, video, audio, even electromagnetic field detectors to rule out any environmental factors that might be affecting his brain activity. The second night started the same way. Marcus tossed and turned for hours, occasionally drifting into light sleep before jerking awake. But around 2 a.m. something changed. I was monitoring from the control room when his brain waves suddenly shifted into those same unusual theta patterns. On the video feed, Marcus appeared to be sleeping peacefully for the first time all night. His breathing was steady, his body relaxed. But then I noticed something that made my skin crawl. Marcus was talking in his sleep. Not mumbling or incoherent babbling, actual conversation. He was responding to someone, pausing as if listening to replies, reacting with appropriate facial expressions. It looked exactly like he was having a lucid, coherent discussion with another person. "No, I can't do that," he said clearly, his eyes still closed. "I won't hurt anyone." A pause as if someone was responding. "I don't care what you want, leave me alone." Another pause, longer this time. Marcus's peaceful expression began to shift into one of fear. "Please," he whispered. "Just let me sleep." That's when I saw it. On the thermal imaging camera, there was a cold spot in the corner of the room. A distinctly human-shaped area where the temperature was nearly 10 degrees lower than the surrounding air. The shape seemed to move slightly, shifting position like someone adjusting their stance. I checked every piece of equipment, ran diagnostics on all the sensors. Everything was functioning normally. There was no mechanical explanation for what I was seeing. Marcus suddenly sat up in bed, wide awake, staring directly at the corner where the cold spot had appeared. "She's here," he said, loud enough for the microphones to pick up. "She's right there." The thermal image showed nothing now, just normal room temperature throughout the space. I spent the rest of the night reviewing the footage, analyzing the data, trying to find a rational explanation. Sleep laboratories are controlled environments. We account for every variable, monitor every system. What I'd recorded shouldn't have been possible, but the data was undeniable. For approximately 12 minutes, something had been in that room with Marcus. Something that affected temperature, influenced his brain activity, and engaged him in conversation that was clearly distressing him. The third night, I made a decision that I've regretted ever since. I decided to sleep in the observation room, connected to the same monitoring equipment as Marcus. If something was visiting him during sleep, maybe I could experience it myself and finally understand what was happening. Marcus arrived looking worse than ever. His hands shook constantly now, and he'd lost at least 10 pounds since his first visit. But he was determined to go through with the study. "She's getting angry," he told me as I attached the electrodes. "She says I'm not listening to her. That I'm being stubborn. What does she want you to do?" Marcus was quiet for a long time. "She wants me to hurt people. Specifically, she wants me to hurt you." The words sent a chill down my spine, but I tried to maintain professional composure. Marcus, you're safe here. Whatever you're experiencing, we'll figure it out together. He looked at me with eyes that held no hope. You don't understand. She's not just in my dreams anymore. She's following me during the day. I see her reflection in windows, shadows that don't match any objects. She's becoming more real and I don't know how to stop it. I should have called off the study right then. Should have referred Marcus to a psychiatrist and filed the whole thing under unusual but explainable psychological phenomena. Instead, I connected myself to the monitoring equipment and settled into the observation room for the night. Around midnight, both Marcus and I fell asleep. The EEG showed normal patterns at first, standard progression through the sleep stages. But at 1:47 a.m., both our brainwaves suddenly shifted into those same unusual theta patterns. That's when the dreams began. I found myself standing in Marcus's apartment, though I'd never been there before. The layout was exactly as he described it. A small one-bedroom with a kitchenette, books scattered everywhere, computer equipment covering most surfaces. But something was wrong with the space. The shadows were too deep, the corners too dark, and there was a feeling of presence that made my skin crawl. Marcus was there, sitting on his couch, staring at something I couldn't see. She's here, he said without looking at me. She's been waiting for you. That's when I saw her. She emerged from the shadows in the corner like darkness given form. Not a traditional apparition. She looked completely solid, completely real. A woman in her 40s with long dark hair and eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. She was wearing clothes that looked decades out of date, and there was something wrong with her proportions, as if she'd been stretched or distorted in subtle ways. Dr. Sarah Chen, she said, and her voice sounded like it was coming from inside my own head. I've been so looking forward to meeting you. I tried to speak, tried to move, but found myself paralyzed. This was a dream, I told myself. Shared dreams weren't possible. This was just my brain processing the stress of Marcus's case. You've been interfering, she continued, moving closer. Marcus belongs to me. He's been chosen for something important, and you're preventing him from fulfilling his purpose. What purpose? I managed to ask. She smiled, and her teeth were too sharp, too numerous. There are others like Marcus, sensitive people who can be reached during sleep, people who can be influenced. Marcus is going to help me find them. The dream shifted, and suddenly I was seeing flashes of other people, men and women of various ages, all with the same haunted look I'd seen in Marcus's eyes. They were scattered across the city, maybe the country, all suffering from the same mysterious insomnia, all visited by the same dark presence. Sleep studies are so useful, she said. All those people, vulnerable and monitored, their brain patterns recorded and cataloged. It's like a shopping catalog for someone like me. That's when I understood. She wasn't just haunting Marcus. She was using him to identify other potential victims. People with the right neurological markers, the right susceptibility to her influence. And my sleep lab, with its detailed recordings and patient database, was helping her build a network. You're going to stop investigating Marcus's case, she told me. You're going to prescribe him sleeping pills and send him home. And then you're going to forget this ever happened. I won't do that. Her expression darkened. Then you'll join him. Sleep is such a vulnerable state, Dr. Chen, and everyone has to sleep eventually. I woke up gasping, my heart racing, the monitoring equipment beeping frantically as it recorded my distressed vital signs. Across the hall, Marcus was sitting up in his bed staring directly at the observation window where I couldn't see him, but somehow knew he was looking right at me. The thermal imaging showed cold spots throughout both rooms. I disconnected myself from the equipment with shaking hands and went to check on Marcus. He was calm, calmer than I'd seen him in days, but there was something different about his eyes, something that wasn't entirely Marcus anymore. "She liked you," he said as I entered his room. "She thinks you'll be very useful." That was 3 months ago. I filed a report that attributed Marcus's condition to severe sleep deprivation and recommended psychiatric evaluation. I prescribed medication and referred him to a colleague. Officially, his case was closed. But I know the truth. She's real, whatever she is, and she's growing stronger. Marcus was just the beginning. I've been tracking sleep disorder cases across the region, and the pattern is clear. More and more people are presenting with Marcus's symptoms: chronic insomnia, vivid dreams of being visited, reports of a dark-haired woman who appears during sleep. The cases are spreading like an infection, connected by something that exists in the space between waking and sleeping. I've tried to investigate, tried to warn other sleep specialists, but who would believe me? A respected doctor claiming that some kind of entity is using dream states to build a network of influenced individuals? I'd lose my license, my career, my credibility. So I do my job. I monitor patients, collect data, file reports. But now, I know that every person who comes through our lab is potentially vulnerable. Every sleep study could be providing her with information she can use to expand her reach. The worst part is the dreams. They started about a month after Marcus's case, ended not every night but often enough. She visits me now just like she visited him, sits in the corner of my bedroom and talks to me while I sleep, telling me about her plans, showing me the network she's building. She wants me to help her identify the most susceptible patients, wants me to provide detailed neurological profiles so she can target the right people. In return, she promises to leave me alone, to let me sleep peacefully again. I haven't given in yet, but I'm exhausted. I haven't had a full night's sleep in weeks, and the sleep deprivation is affecting my work, my health, my sanity. Every night is a battle of will, and I'm losing ground. Last night, she showed me something that terrifies me more than all her previous threats. She showed me other sleep labs, other technicians who look just like I do now, hollow-eyed, exhausted, broken. People who gave in to her demands and now serve as her recruitment agents, identifying vulnerable patients and feeding her information. "You can't fight forever," she told me. "Everyone breaks eventually. Everyone chooses sleep over suffering." She's right, and we both know it. The human need for sleep is too fundamental to resist indefinitely. Eventually, I'll be so exhausted that I'll agree to anything she asks, just for the promise of peaceful rest. But until then, I'm documenting everything, writing down what I know, creating a record that might help someone else understand what's happening. Because I don't think she's unique. I think there are others like her, entities that exist in the borderland between consciousness and dreams, feeding on human vulnerability and building networks of influence. The sleep studies continue. People come to the lab seeking help with their insomnia, their nightmares, their mysterious sleep disorders. I monitor them, record their brain patterns, and file my reports. But now I know that some of them aren't patients. They're scouts. People she's already claimed, coming to identify new targets. I can recognize them now. They have the same look Marcus had in those final days. Calm on the surface, but hollow underneath, as if something essential has been carved out of them. They sleep peacefully during their studies, but their dreams are filled with whispered conversations and shadowy meetings. And every night, when I finally succumb to exhaustion and drift off to sleep, she's there waiting for me. Patient and persistent, wearing down my resistance with promises of rest, and threats of endless suffering. I know how this ends. I've seen it in the dreams she shows me, watched other specialists make the same choice I'm facing. Eventually, the need for sleep becomes stronger than the need to resist, and she gains another ally in her spreading network. But not yet. Not tonight. I'll take another stimulant, drink another cup of coffee, fight for another day, because somewhere out there other people are having dreams they can't explain, seeing shadows that shouldn't exist, feeling presences that science insists aren't real, and they deserve to know that they're not alone, not crazy, and not safe. The hardest part isn't the exhaustion or the fear. It's the knowledge that she's right about human nature. Given enough time, enough pressure, enough suffering, people will choose peace over principles. They'll trade their integrity for rest, their freedom for the promise of untroubled sleep. I understand now why Marcus looked so calm in those final days. There's a terrible relief in surrender, a seductive peace in giving up the fight. Part of me envies the patients I see who've already been claimed. They sleep so peacefully, their faces serene even as their dreams are filled with darkness. But I'm not ready to join them. Not yet. Though I wonder, as I write these words in the deep hours of another sleepless night, how long my resistance will last. And I wonder what will happen to all the vulnerable people seeking help when there's no one left to warn them about the price of peaceful slumber. She's coming for all of us, one dream at a time. And the worst part is, eventually, we'll welcome her with open arms. The midnight visitor, I've always been a light sleeper. My mother used to say it was a blessing in disguise, that I'd never miss an important phone call or sleep through an emergency. She was right, in a way. My light sleeping probably saved my life, but it also introduced me to something I wish I'd never encountered. It started 3 months ago when I moved into the duplex on Elm Street. The rent was reasonable, the neighborhood seemed safe, and most importantly, it was mine, my first place. After finally scraping together enough money to leave my cramped studio apartment, the duplex was old but well maintained, with hardwood floors that creaked in all the right places and windows that let in streams of golden morning light. Mrs. Kowalski, my elderly neighbor who shared the other half of the duplex, welcomed me with homemade pierogi and a warning about the thin walls. "You might hear me moving around at night," she said apologetically as we stood on her front porch. "Old bones don't sleep well, and I tend to wander around when I can't rest. I hope it won't bother you too much." I assured her it wouldn't be a problem. I was used to apartment living after all. Thin walls, noisy neighbors, the constant background hum of other people's lives. How different could this be? For the first 2 weeks, everything was exactly as Mrs. Kowalski had described. I'd hear her moving around next door occasionally, footsteps across the floor, a chair scraping, sometimes the faint sound of her television. Normal sounds from a normal neighbor living her normal life. But then I started noticing the pattern. Mrs. Kowalski's nighttime wandering always happened at the same time, exactly midnight. I'd be lying in bed, perhaps reading or scrolling through my phone, when I'd hear her front door open. The sound carried clearly through our shared wall, the distinctive creak of old hinges, followed by the soft thud of the door closing. Then footsteps across her front porch, down the steps, and along the walkway that led to the street. I assumed she was taking late-night walks. Insomnia affects people differently, and maybe fresh air helped her sleep. It was a safe neighborhood, well lit, and Mrs. Kowalski seemed spry for her age. But the walks were getting longer. At first, she'd be gone for maybe 20 minutes, then an hour, then 2 hours. I'd lie awake listening for her return, partly out of concern, and partly because her front door had a particularly loud squeak that always woke me when she came back. One night, around 2:30 a.m., I heard her return from one of these midnight excursions, but instead of the usual pattern of footsteps and a closing door, I heard something different. Voices. Low, muffled conversation coming from her front porch. I couldn't make out words, but there were definitely two people talking, Mrs. Kowalski's voice and someone else's. A man's voice, deeper and unfamiliar. This went on for about 10 minutes before I heard her door close and the other person's footsteps fade away down the street. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe she'd run into a neighbor during her walk, and they'd walked back together. Maybe it was a friend or family member who'd been worried about her late-night wandering. But it happened again the next night, and the night after that. Always the same pattern. Mrs. Kowalski leaving at midnight, returning around 2:30 a.m. with someone else. 10 minutes of quiet conversation on her porch, then the other person leaving. My curiosity got the better of me. On Thursday night, I positioned myself by my bedroom window, which had a view of Mrs. Kowalski's front porch. At midnight, right on schedule, I saw her emerge from her half of the duplex. But something was wrong with what I was seeing. Mrs. Kowalski looked different. She moved with a strange, shuffling gait that I'd never seen before. Her usually neat gray hair was disheveled, hanging loose around her shoulders. She was wearing what looked like a nightgown, which seemed odd for someone going out for a walk. Most unsettling of all, she walked straight down the middle of the street instead of using the sidewalk, moving in a perfectly straight line like she was following some invisible guide. I watched until she disappeared around the corner, then set an alarm for 2:30 a.m. to see her return. When my alarm went off, I crept back to the window and waited. Sure enough, around 2:40 a.m., I saw Mrs. Kowalski walking back up the street in that same strange, shuffling manner. But she wasn't alone. There was a man with her. Even in the dim streetlight, I could see he was tall and thin, wearing what looked like an old-fashioned suit. His hair was dark and slicked back, and he walked with the same odd, purposeful gait as Mrs. Kowalski. They stopped on her front porch, and I strained to hear their conversation. Their voices were too low to make out individual words, but the rhythm of their speech was strange, stilted and formal, like they were reciting something rather than having a natural conversation. After about 10 minutes, the man turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows between streetlights. Mrs. Kowalski went inside, and I heard her door close. I didn't sleep well that night. The next morning, I decided to check on Mrs. Kowalski. I knocked on her door around 9 a.m., planning to casually ask about her nighttime walks and maybe gauge whether she was okay. She answered, the door looking perfectly normal. Neat gray hair in its usual bun, flowered housecoat, friendly smile. She invited me in for coffee and seemed completely alert and coherent. Mrs. Kowalski, I said carefully, I hope you don't mind me asking, but I've noticed you going out quite late at night. I just wanted to make sure you're okay. She looked genuinely puzzled. Going out at night? I'm afraid I don't know what you mean, dear. I'm usually in bed by 10 p.m., but I've heard you leaving around midnight several times this week. The puzzled expression deepened. That's very strange. I don't remember going anywhere at night. Are you sure it was me you heard? Her confusion seemed genuine, not like someone trying to hide something. She really didn't seem to remember her midnight excursions. Maybe I was mistaken, I said, not wanting to worry her. The walls are thin, and sound carries strangely sometimes, but I knew what I'd seen. That night, I decided to be more systematic about my observations. I set up my phone to record video from my bedroom window, positioning, It had captured Mrs. Kowalski's front porch and the street beyond. At exactly midnight, she emerged from her house. The video captured everything I'd observed the night before: the shuffling walk, the disheveled appearance, the strange straight-line path down the middle of the street. But when I reviewed the footage the next morning, I noticed something I'd missed while watching in real time. Mrs. Kowalski's eyes were closed. Throughout the entire sequence, walking down the steps, along the walkway down the street, her eyes remained shut. She was sleepwalking. That explained the shuffling gait, the strange behavior, and why she had no memory of her nighttime excursions. But it didn't explain the man who walked back with her, or their conversation on the porch. I fast-forwarded to 2:30 a.m. and watched her return. Again, her eyes were closed and she moved with that same somnambulistic shuffle. The man was with her, tall and thin in his old-fashioned suit. But when I looked more closely at the video, something made my blood run cold. The man's eyes were closed too. They were both sleepwalking. I watched the porch conversation again, paying closer attention. Their movements were mechanical, puppet-like. Their mouths moved, but the timing seemed off, like the words weren't quite matching their lip movements. And there was something else, something that made me rewind the video 3 times to make sure I was seeing it correctly. In the streetlight's glow, neither of them cast a shadow. I stared at my phone screen, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe it was the angle of the light or a quirk of the video compression. Maybe my phone's camera wasn't picking up the shadows properly. But deep down, I knew I was grasping for logical explanations to something that defied logic. The next day, I did some research on the duplex's history. Property records showed it had been built in 1943 and had changed hands several times over the decades. Most of the previous owners had lived there for only a few years, unusually short tenancies for what seemed like a desirable property. I found an old newspaper article from 1987 about a mysterious death at an address that matched my duplex. A man named Harold Brennan, 34, had been found dead in his bed with no apparent cause. The article mentioned that neighbors had reported seeing him walking around the neighborhood at all hours in the days before his death, despite his family's insistence that he was a sound sleeper who never left his bed after 9 p.m. Another article from 1994 described the death of Margaret Foster, an elderly woman who had lived in the duplex. She'd been found dead in her garden in the middle of the night, wearing only her nightgown. Family members told police she had been experiencing severe insomnia and had been taking sleeping pills, but neighbors reported seeing her walking around the neighborhood in the early morning hours for weeks before her death. Both Harold Brennan and Margaret Foster had lived in Mrs. Kowalski's half of the duplex. I spent the rest of the afternoon digging deeper into the property's history. What I found made me seriously consider breaking my lease and moving out immediately. Over the past 50 years, 7 people had died while living in Mrs. Kowalski's half of the duplex. All had been found dead in circumstances suggesting they'd been sleepwalking or moving around at night. All had been described by neighbors as taking midnight walks in the weeks before their deaths. And according to several witness statements, in old police reports, most had been seen walking with a tall man in a dark suit in the days immediately before they died. That evening, I knocked on Mrs. Kowalski's door again. I needed to warn her even if she didn't remember her midnight excursions. "Mrs. Kowalski, I need to tell you something important," I said when she answered. "I've been researching the history of this building, and I think there might be something dangerous happening here." I explained what I'd discovered about the previous deaths, the pattern of sleepwalking, and the mysterious man in the suit. Mrs. Kowalski listened politely, but I could see skepticism growing in her eyes. "That's a very interesting story, dear," she said when I finished. "But I think you might be letting your imagination run away with you. I've lived here for 8 years and nothing unusual has ever happened. But the midnight walks, I told you I don't take midnight walks. I'm usually fast asleep by 10 p.m. She was getting agitated, so I decided not to push the issue. But as I turned to leave, she called after me. You know, though, I have been having the strangest dreams lately. I turned back. What kind of dreams? I dream that I'm walking through the neighborhood, but it's not quite right. The houses are there, but they look older, different, and there's always a man walking with me, talking about things I can't quite remember when I wake up. My heart started racing. What does the man look like? Tall, thin, very well dressed. Old-fashioned clothes, like from a movie about the 1940s. He's very polite, very charming. In the dreams, I feel like I've known him for a long time. Mrs. Kowalski, these aren't dreams. You really are taking these walks. I've seen you. She shook her head firmly. That's impossible. I would remember, but I could see uncertainty creeping into her expression. That night, I didn't even try to sleep. I positioned myself by the window with my phone ready to record again. At midnight, Mrs. Kowalski emerged from her house, eyes closed, moving in, that mechanical sleepwalking shuffle. But this time, I decided to follow her. I grabbed a jacket and slipped out my front door, staying far enough behind to avoid detection but close enough to see where she was going. She walked down Elm Street, turned left on Maple, then right on Oak, a route that took her through the oldest part of the neighborhood. The houses here were different from the more modern developments near our duplex. These were original 1940s construction, and in the dim streetlight they looked exactly as they must have decades ago. Mrs. Kowalski walked for about 20 minutes before stopping in front of a house on Pine Street. It was a small craftsman bungalow, dark and apparently empty. She stood at the front gate for several minutes, swaying slightly, then turned and began walking back the way she'd come. I followed at a distance, expecting her to retrace her route home. But halfway back, she stopped. There was someone walking toward us from the opposite direction. Even from 50 yards away, I could see it was the tall man in the suit. He moved with the same mechanical gait, the same closed-eyed purposefulness. When he reached Mrs. Kowalski, they fell into step beside each other and continued walking back toward our duplex. I hung back, watching them walk together. Their conversation started immediately. The same low, formal tones I'd heard from my bedroom window. But now, close enough to make out some words, I realized they weren't speaking English. It sounded like some kind of recitation, rhythmic and repetitive, like a prayer or chant in a language I didn't recognize. They walked back to Mrs. Kowalski's porch, had their usual 10-minute conversation, then the man turned and walked away. But instead of disappearing into the shadows as I'd seen before, I followed him. He walked 3 blocks east, turned north for 2 blocks, then stopped in front of Greenwood Cemetery. The cemetery gates were locked, but the man walked directly to them, passed through as if they weren't there, and disappeared among the headstones. I stood at the locked gates, staring into the darkness beyond, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. A thought occurred to me, and I pulled out my phone to search for information about the cemetery. Greenwood Cemetery, established 1943. I scrolled through the online directory of burials, searching for a name that might match the mysterious man. Found it in the records from 1947. Harold Marcus Brennan, age 29, died March 15, 1947. The same last name as Harold Brennan, the man who died in Mrs. Kowalski's half of the duplex in 1987. I searched further and found the family connection. Harold Marcus Brennan was Harold Brennan's uncle. The obituary was brief but informative. Harold Marcus Brennan had been a traveling salesman who died suddenly while visiting family in town. The cause of death was listed as heart failure, but the obituary mentioned that he'd been found dead in his bed at a local boarding house with no apparent explanation for his sudden demise. The boarding house had been located on Pine Street, the same street where Mrs. Kowalski had stopped during her sleepwalking journey. The pieces were starting to come together, but the picture they formed was impossible to accept. Harold Marcus. Brennan had died in 1947, but somehow he was still walking around at midnight, collecting people for nighttime excursions through the neighborhood, and everyone who went on these walks eventually died under mysterious circumstances. I had to get Mrs. Kowalski away from that house. The next morning, I called in sick to work and spent the day researching protective measures against supernatural encounters. Most of what I found online was either obviously fake or unhelpfully vague, but I did come across some consistent themes: salt barriers, iron objects, religious symbols, and avoiding direct contact with spirits. I also found several accounts of people who'd escaped similar situations by physically preventing themselves from sleepwalking. Locked doors, alarms, even tying themselves to their beds. That evening, I knocked on Mrs. Kowalski's door with a plan. Mrs. Kowalski, I know you. Don't believe me about the midnight walks, but I want to ask you to try something, just for one night. I explained my idea. She would lock her front door and give me the key before going to bed. If she really wasn't sleepwalking, then having a locked door wouldn't matter. But if she was, it might prevent her from leaving the house. She was reluctant at first, but I think my obvious distress convinced her to humor me. "All right," she said. "One night. But I want my key back first thing in the morning." At 11:30 p.m., Mrs. Kowalski locked her front door and handed me the key through our shared back fence. I went to bed feeling cautiously optimistic. At midnight, I heard the familiar sound of Mrs. Kowalski moving around next door, footsteps across her floor approaching the front door, the sound of the door handle turning, then silence. I waited, listening intently. After a few minutes, I heard footsteps again, but they were different now, agitated, pacing back and forth across her front room. Then I heard something that made my skin crawl. Knocking. Someone was knocking on Mrs. Kowalski's front door from the outside. Slow, rhythmic knocking that went on for several minutes. Then a voice, muffled but clearly male. "Margaret, it's time for our walk." The knocking continued, patient and persistent. I crept to my bedroom window and peered out at Mrs. Kowalski's porch. The tall man in the suit was standing at her front door, knocking calmly. His eyes were still closed, but his movements were more animated than I'd seen before, as if Mrs. Kowalski's absence from their midnight routine had awakened something in him. "Margaret," he called again, his voice carrying clearly in the still night air. "Don't keep me waiting." The knocking grew louder, more insistent. I could hear Mrs. Kowalski moving around frantically in her house, but she couldn't open the door without the key. The man stopped knocking and turned to look directly at my window. Even with his eyes closed, I knew he was looking at me. "You," he said, his voice carrying impossibly well across the distance between us. "You have what belongs to me." I ducked below the windowsill, my heart hammering. When I worked up the courage to peek out again, he was gone, but I could hear him moving around the duplex, circling the building. Footsteps on gravel, the sound of someone testing windows and doors. Then I heard him at my back door. Slow, deliberate knocking, just like at Mrs. Kowalski's front door. "I know you're in there." His voice carried through the door. "Give me back what you took." The knocking continued for over an hour. I sat in my living room, clutching the key to Mrs. Kowalski's front door, listening to him move around my house. Sometimes he knocked, sometimes he tried the windows, sometimes he just stood, quietly outside like he was waiting for me to make a mistake. Around 2 a.m., everything went quiet. I waited another hour before creeping to the window to check if he was gone. The street was empty, but I didn't trust it. I spent the rest of the night sitting in my kitchen with a baseball bat across my knees, jumping at every sound. The next morning, Mrs. Kowalski knocked on my door at 7 a.m. She looked haggard with dark circles under her eyes and her usually neat hair disheveled. "Something happened last night," she said without preamble. "I remember it. All of it." I invited her in and made coffee while she told me what she remembered. I woke up around midnight with the strongest urge to go outside. But when I tried to open my front door, I couldn't. It was locked, of course. That's when I heard him knocking. She described hearing the man's voice, his increasingly agitated attempts to get her to come outside. But the strangest part, she continued, was that I could remember other nights. All those midnight walks you asked me about. I could suddenly remember every single one. According to Mrs. Kowalski's recovered memories, the midnight walks had been going on for over a year. The man, who had always introduced himself as Harold, would lead her through the neighborhood, showing her houses and telling her stories about the people who used to live in them. He was always very charming, very polite, she said. He made these walks seem perfectly normal, like we were old friends taking a stroll together. But last night, when I couldn't come outside, I saw his true nature. What do you mean? He wasn't trying to be my friend. He was hunting me. Slowly, patiently, night after night, leading me closer to something terrible. And if you hadn't stopped me... She trailed off, but I could see the understanding in her eyes. She knew about the previous deaths, the pattern of sleepwalking that had claimed 7 other residents of her half of the duplex. "We need to leave," I said. "Both of us. Today." Mrs. Kowalski nodded. "I've already called my daughter in Phoenix. She's been asking me to move closer to her for years. I think it's time." We spent that day packing essentials and making arrangements. Mrs. Kowalski would leave for Phoenix that evening. I would stay in a hotel until I could break my lease and find somewhere else to live. But Harold wasn't going to let us go that easily. As evening approached, strange things started happening around the duplex. Lights would flicker on and off, doors would open and close by themselves, and we both heard footsteps on the roof. Most unsettling of all, we started hearing voices, not just Harold's, but multiple voices, having conversations in rooms where no one was present. "The others," Mrs. Kowalski whispered as we listened to what sounded like a dinner party happening in her empty dining room. "All the people who died here. He's gathering them." At 6 p.m., Mrs. Kowalski's daughter arrived to pick her up. As they loaded suitcases into the car, I could see figures moving behind the windows of the duplex, shadowy shapes that shouldn't have been there. "Thank you," Mrs. Kowalski said as she got into her daughter's car. "You saved my life." As they drove away, I heard Harold's voice from somewhere behind me. "You can't save everyone." I turned, but there was no one there, just the empty duplex and the gathering shadows of evening. I grabbed my overnight bag and headed for my car, planning to drive straight to the hotel and never look back. But as I reached for my car door, I felt a hand on my shoulder. Harold stood behind me, solid and real in a way he'd never seemed before. His eyes were open now, and they were completely black. "You owe me," he said. "I had her for a year. You took her away." "She's gone," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Find someone else." He smiled, and his teeth were too white, too sharp. "I already have." That's when I realized the truth. Harold didn't just hunt the residents of Mrs. Kowalski's half of the duplex. He hunted anyone who interfered with his plans. He'd been hunting me since the night I'd followed Mrs. Kowalski and discovered his secret. Every night at midnight, he said, his grip tightening on my shoulder. You'll walk with me. And eventually, when you've learned to stop fighting, you'll join the others permanently. I tried to pull away, but his hand felt like iron. Cold, unyielding iron that seemed to freeze my shoulder where he touched it. Let me go, I said. I don't think so. That's when I remembered the research I'd done, the protective measures I'd read about. I still had Mrs. Kowalski's front door key in my pocket. Old iron, probably from the 1940s when the duplex was built. I pulled out the key and pressed it against Harold's hand. He screamed and jerked away, his form becoming translucent and flickering, like a bad television signal. Iron, I said, understanding. You can't touch iron. Harold's form solidified again, but he kept his distance. Clever, he said. But iron won't protect you forever, and I have all the time in the world. I backed toward my car, keeping the key extended between us. Harold followed, staying just out of reach, his black eyes never leaving mine. I'll be waiting, he said as I got into my car. Every midnight, I'll be waiting. And eventually, you'll forget to carry that key. Eventually, you'll let your guard down. I drove to the hotel that night, then to a new apartment the next week, then to a new city the month after that. But Harold was right. He's waiting. Every night at midnight, no matter where I am, I hear footsteps outside my door. Sometimes I see him in reflections, standing behind me in windows or mirrors. Always patient, always polite, always ready to resume our interrupted conversation. I carry iron with me everywhere now. Keys, jewelry, small tools. It keeps him at bay, but I know it's only a temporary solution. I can see it in his smile when he appears, that confidence that time is on his side. He knows what I'm beginning to understand. You can't run from something that exists outside the normal rules of time and space. You can only postpone the inevitable. And as I write this, sitting in yet another hotel room in yet another city, I can hear him knocking on my door. Patient, persistent, eternal. It's time for our walk, he says through the door. And someday when I'm too tired to fight anymore, when the weight of constant vigilance becomes too much to bear, I know I'll open that door. I'll take his arm, close my eyes, and let him lead me on that final midnight stroll, the one that never ends. Don't Wake the Dead working the night shift at Riverside Memorial Hospital wasn't supposed to be anything more than a paycheck. I was 23, fresh out of nursing school, and the graveyard shift paid 30% more than days. Simple economics drove my decision. Student loans don't pay themselves, and working nights meant I could take classes during the day to finish my bachelor's degree. What I didn't expect was how quiet death could be. Riverside Memorial had been serving our mid-sized city for over 60 years, and the building showed its age in ways that went beyond peeling paint and flickering fluorescent lights. The basement morgue was particularly unsettling. A maze of sterile hallways and refrigerated chambers that seemed to swallow sound. My duties rarely took me down there, but sometimes the elevator would malfunction and stop at B1. The doors sliding open to reveal that long, empty corridor stretching into shadows. I'd been working nights for about 3 months when I met Dr. Marcus Kellerman. He was the chief pathologist, a man in his early 50s who seemed to live at the hospital. Even during my shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. I'd often see him in the halls reviewing files or heading down to the morgue for what he called late-night consultations. Dr. Kellerman was professional but distant, the kind of person who spoke in measured sentences and never quite made eye contact. His colleagues respected him, but I noticed they didn't seem to like him much. There was something about the way conversations died when he approached, how people found excuses to be elsewhere when he was around. He's been here forever, explained Janet, one of the senior nurses, when I asked about him. Brilliant pathologist, but he's got some unusual theories about his work. Just don't get him started on post-mortem consciousness. He can talk about it for hours. Post-mortem consciousness. The phrase stuck with me, though I didn't think much about it until the night I encountered Dr. Kellerman in the morgue. It was around 2 a.m. when I got the call to bring some medication down to the security office on the first floor. The elevator was acting up again, stopping at B1 instead of 1. As the doors opened, I saw lights on in the morgue. Not the harsh fluorescence, but softer lighting that cast strange shadows along the walls. I should have taken the stairs. Should have minded my own business and completed my errand. Instead, curiosity got the better of me, and I found myself walking down that long corridor toward the source of the light. The main examination room was dimly lit by a single desk lamp. Dr. Kellerman stood over one of the examination tables, speaking in a low, conversational tone to someone I couldn't see. As I got closer, I realized he was talking to the body on the table, an elderly woman who'd passed away earlier that evening. The transition is always difficult, he was saying, his voice gentle and patient. But you're not alone in this. I'm here to help you understand what's happening. He looked up and saw me standing in the doorway. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he smiled, a sad, tired expression that made him look much older than his years. "Miss Rodriguez," he said. "I wasn't expecting company." "I'm sorry, Dr. Kellerman. The elevator malfunctioned, and I saw the lights. I was just curious." He nodded slowly, as if deciding something. "Would you like to know what I do down here? My real work, I mean. Not the official autopsies and reports. Every instinct told me to make an excuse and leave. But there was something in his voice, a loneliness that resonated with my own experience of working these empty night hours. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Doctor," Kellerman gestured to the body on the table. "Mrs. Patterson here died at 6:47 this evening. Cardiac arrest. Very peaceful. Her family was with her, and she passed surrounded by love. But death isn't the end of consciousness, Miss Rodriguez. It's a transition, and some people need help making that transition." The words should have sounded crazy, should have sent me running back to the safety of the upper floors. Instead, I found myself stepping closer. "What kind of help?" "Come here," he said. "Listen carefully." I approached the table where Mrs. Patterson lay. She looked peaceful, her face relaxed in a way that suggested she'd found relief from whatever pain had brought her to the hospital. Dr. Kellerman placed his hand gently on her forehead. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "if you listen very carefully, in the hours after death you can hear them. Not words exactly, but something like thoughts. Confusion mostly. Fear. They don't understand what's happened to them." I strained to listen, expecting to hear nothing but the hum of the refrigeration units and the distant sounds of the hospital above us. But there was something else. So faint, I might have imagined it. A sound like whispered breathing. Or maybe just the building settling. "I help them understand," Dr. Kellerman continued. "I explain what's happening, help them let go of their attachment to this world. It's a service the medical establishment doesn't recognize, but it's necessary work." Over the following weeks, I found myself drawn back to the morgue during my shifts. Dr. Kellerman never invited me, but he didn't ask me to leave either. I would watch as he performed his unusual consultations, speaking to the recently deceased in that same gentle, patient tone. At first, I was skeptical. The human mind is capable of incredible self-deception, and I assumed I was hearing what I wanted to hear, seeing patterns that weren't really there. But gradually, I began to notice things that were harder to dismiss. The bodies Dr. Kellerman worked with seemed more peaceful than others. Their expressions were calmer, their positioning more natural. Families often commented on how serene their loved ones looked, how they seemed to have found peace. More disturbing were the bodies he hadn't worked with, people who died suddenly or violently, without the benefit of his post-mortem counseling. These corpses seemed restless somehow. Their faces held expressions of confusion or distress that didn't fade even hours after death. The morgue attendants complained about these cases, said they gave them the creeps. Not everyone can let go, Dr. Kellerman explained one night as we stood over the body of a car accident victim. Some people hold on too tightly to life and their consciousness becomes trapped between states. They're not alive, but they're not truly dead either. What happens to them? His expression darkened. They become problems, disturbances. There are old stories about restless spirits, but the truth is simpler and more terrible. Consciousness that can't move on becomes corrupted, twisted by the trauma of being caught between life and death. That night, he showed me something I'll never forget. The accident victim, a young man named David Chen, had been brought in that afternoon. He died instantly when his motorcycle collided with a semi-truck, but his body showed the violence of that impact. Dr. Kellerman had been trying to reach him for hours, speaking in that same calm voice, explaining the nature of death and the need to let go. But David wasn't listening. As Dr. Kellerman worked, I began to hear something that wasn't quite sound, a presence that felt angry, confused, desperate. The temperature in the room dropped noticeably, and the fluorescent lights began to flicker. "David," Dr. Kellerman said firmly, "you need to understand. Your body is gone. The life you knew is over. Holding on will only cause suffering, for you and for others." The response was immediate and terrifying. Every piece of equipment in the room began to malfunction simultaneously. Monitors sparked and went dark. The examination table shook violently, and a scream that wasn't quite audible filled the air with such intensity that I dropped to my knees, hands pressed against my ears. Dr. Kellerman never flinched. He continued speaking in that same calm tone, one hand resting on David's forehead, his voice cutting through the chaos. "I know you're frightened. I know this isn't what you expected. But fighting will only make it worse. You have to let go, David. You have to trust that there's something beyond this moment." The disturbance lasted for nearly 10 minutes before gradually subsiding. When it was over, David's body looked different, more peaceful, more natural. The violent tension had left his features, replaced by an expression of calm acceptance. "That's why I do this work," Dr. Kellerman said quietly. "Some consciousnesses are stronger than others, more resistant to the transition. Without help, they can become dangerous. Dangerous how? They influence the living, create disturbances. In extreme cases, they can actually possess vulnerable individuals, people who are sleeping, under anesthesia, or otherwise unconscious. The medical literature is full of cases that sound like psychiatric disorders, but are actually manifestations of trapped consciousness seeking a way back to life. Over the following months, I became Dr. Kellerman's unofficial assistant. I learned to recognize the signs of restless death, to identify which bodies would need his special attention. We developed a system. I would alert him to problematic cases, and he would perform his consultations during the quiet hours of the night shift. The work was emotionally draining but strangely rewarding. Families began to comment on how peaceful their loved ones looked, how the funeral home staff remarked on the serene quality of the bodies we sent them. We were providing a service that no one understood but everyone benefited from. That changed 6 months ago when Sarah Morrison died. Sarah was a 34-year-old teacher who'd been brought to the ER after a severe allergic reaction. Despite the medical team's best efforts, she went into cardiac arrest and couldn't be revived. It should have been a routine case, a sudden but peaceful death, the kind Dr. Kellerman had helped with hundreds of times before. But Sarah was different. From the moment her body arrived in the morgue, something felt wrong. The room was colder than usual, and there was a presence that felt not just restless but actively malevolent. When Dr. Kellerman began his consultation, Sarah's response was immediate and violent. Every light in the morgue went out simultaneously. Emergency power kicked in, bathing the room in an eerie red glow. The temperature dropped so dramatically that our breath was visible and frost began forming on the metal surfaces. "Sarah," Dr. Kellerman said, his voice less calm than usual, "you need to listen to me. You've passed away and you need to let go of this world." The response was a wave of pure rage that hit us like a physical force. Equipment flew across the room. Metal drawers slammed open and shut, and the corpse on the table began to move. Not reanimation, but violent convulsions that shouldn't have been possible in a body that had been dead for hours. But the worst part was the voice. Not heard but felt. Words that formed directly in our minds with the force of screaming. "I'm not dead. I'm not ready. Give me back my life." Dr. Kellerman worked for 3 hours that night, trying every technique he'd developed over years of practice. Nothing helped. If anything, Sarah's consciousness seemed to grow stronger, more coherent, more determined to return to life. Finally, he made a decision that haunts me to this day. "Sarah," he said, "if you won't let go willingly, then you leave. Me no choice. I'm going to help you find a way back." He looked at me with eyes that held a terrible sadness. "Miss Rodriguez, I need you to leave now. What I'm about to do, it's not something you should witness. I should have left. Should have walked away and forgotten everything I'd seen. Instead, I hid in the supply closet and watched through the partially open door as Dr. Kellerman performed a procedure I'd never seen before. He connected Sarah's body to a complex array of equipment, not the standard monitoring devices, but specialized apparatus that seemed designed to measure and manipulate electrical activity in ways I didn't understand. Then he did something that violates every medical protocol and ethical standard I'd ever learned. He sedated himself and lay down on the adjacent examination table, connecting his own body to the same equipment. "Sarah," he said as the drugs took effect, "if you want to live again, you'll need a vessel. I'm offering you mine." What happened next defies rational explanation. The equipment registered massive electrical activity from both bodies, patterns that looked almost like communication between two separate systems. Dr. Kellerman's body convulsed for nearly 20 minutes, while Sarah's corpse remained perfectly still. When it was over, Dr. Kellerman sat up slowly, disconnected the equipment, and began to clean up as if nothing unusual had happened. But something fundamental had changed. His movements were different, more graceful, more feminine. His voice, when he spoke, carried a different cadence. "Thank you," he said, and the words carried Sarah's gratitude, not his. That was 6 months ago. Since then, I've been watching Dr. Kellerman carefully, and I've seen the truth of what happened that night. Sarah Morrison didn't die. She found a way back to life by taking over Dr. Kellerman's body. Not possession in the supernatural sense, but something more like a blending of consciousness, two minds sharing one physical form. The changes have been gradual but unmistakable. Dr. Kellerman now wears his hair differently, moves with a more feminine gait, shows interests he'd never expressed before. He's taken up watercolor painting, Sarah's hobby. He's become vegetarian, Sarah's dietary choice. He speaks with knowledge of teaching techniques and classroom management that a pathologist would have no reason to know. Most disturbing are the moments when the blend slips and I can see Sarah looking out through Dr. Kellerman's eyes. She smiles when she sees me, a grateful expression that acknowledges what we shared in those final moments of her transition. But Dr. Kellerman is still there too, trapped in his own body with an unwelcome passenger. Sometimes I catch glimpses of him, moments of confusion or distress when he seems to remember who he used to be. Those moments are becoming rarer. The worst part is that this isn't the first time. I've been researching Dr. Kellerman's career, looking into his publications and case histories. What I've found suggests that his work with postmortem consciousness began decades ago, and that Sarah Morrison isn't his first unsuccessful case. There are records of other difficult transitions, other cases where his usual methods failed. And there are subtle changes in his behavior documented over the years, shifts in personality, new interests and abilities that appeared without explanation. I think Dr. Kellerman has been sharing his body with multiple consciousnesses for years, each one adding to the complex blend of personalities that now occupies his physical form. Sarah is just the latest addition to an increasingly crowded mental space. The implications terrify me. If consciousness can survive death and transfer to living hosts, then what I've been witnessing isn't medical treatment. It's a form of immortality. Dr. Kellerman has been helping people cheat death by stealing life from the living. But why? What drove him to develop these techniques? Was it scientific curiosity, a desire to help, or something more personal? I think I know the answer, and it keeps me awake during the day when I should be sleeping. 3 weeks ago, I gained access to Dr. Kellerman's personal files. Hidden among decades of research notes, I found a photograph of a young woman who looked exactly like Sarah Morrison. The photo was dated 40 years ago, and the name on the back read, Margaret Kellerman, beloved wife. Dr. Kellerman's wife died in a car accident when he was just starting his career as a pathologist. According to the records, she was 26 years old, a teacher, interested in art and poetry. The description matches Sarah Morrison perfectly. I don't think Dr. Kellerman has been helping random people cheat death. I think he's been trying to bring back his wife, over and over again, using the bodies of women who remind him of her. Sarah Morrison was just the latest attempt, the closest match he'd found in years. But something went wrong this time. Instead of Margaret's consciousness returning to inhabit Sarah's body, Sarah's consciousness ended up in his. Now he's trapped with her, and possibly with fragments of all the other women he's tried to save over the decades. The night shift continues. Bodies still arrive in the morgue, families still grieve, and Dr. Kellerman still performs his consultations. But now I watch him carefully, looking for signs of who's in control at any given moment. Sometimes it's clearly Sarah, young, grateful, still adjusting to her new existence. Sometimes it's someone else entirely, glimpses of personalities. I don't recognize fragments of consciousness that speak with different voices and different mannerisms. And sometimes, rarely, it's still Dr. Kellerman himself, confused, frightened, aware of what he's become but powerless to change it. Last night, during one of those rare moments of clarity, he grabbed my arm as I was leaving the morgue. "Stop me," he whispered, his voice carrying none of Sarah's warmth or the other personalities' foreign cadences. "If you ever see me trying to help someone who won't let go, stop me. Don't let me add anyone else to this collection." But I know I won't be able to stop him. The part of him that's still Dr. Kellerman is getting weaker each day. overwhelmed by the growing crowd of consciousness that shares his body. Soon, he'll be nothing but another voice in the chorus. And Sarah, or whoever becomes dominant, will continue his work. The hospital administration has noticed the changes, but they attribute them to stress and overwork. They've suggested he take a vacation, maybe consider early retirement. They have no idea that the man they're worried about ceased to exist months ago. I've thought about reporting what I've seen, but who would believe me? A night shift nurse, claiming that the chief pathologist is performing consciousness transfers in the morgue. I'd be dismissed as delusional, probably subjected to psychiatric evaluation myself. So I continue my rounds, distribute medications, monitor patients, and try to avoid the basement level where impossible things happen in the quiet hours before dawn. But I know that eventually I'll be called down there again. Someone will die who can't let go, and Dr. Kellerman, or whatever he's become, will offer them the same terrible bargain he offered Sarah. The dead are supposed to stay dead. That's the natural order, the way things are meant to be. But in the basement of Riverside Memorial Hospital, that order has been violated so many times that the boundaries between life and death have become meaningless. And I'm the only one who knows the truth. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is wake the dead, because they might decide they want to stay awake.